Alright guys, so if you've been drilling or sparring all day with your sword or your fetterschwert, and you haven't been wearing gloves, or you've been sweating through your gloves, putting the blade on like your sweaty sparring partner and whatnot, then chances are, over time, it's gonna get rusty. So here are some basic tips as to how you can prevent your sword from getting rusty. And I'm not gonna lie, your sword's probably gonna get rusty, so I'm also gonna show you how to knock some of the rust off. It's a very simple process, but to keep your sword from getting rusty, you're going to need a rag that you don't mind getting oily, some rubbing alcohol, and some sort of oil. I use gun oil because it is specifically made for this type of steel. So, the first thing I want to do, alright, let me set the sword aside for a second. The first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to take some oil, not some oil, I want to take some alcohol, and what this is going to do is this is going to break up the caked on sweat and grease from your hands. It's gonna break it up and take it off of all of the fittings. That way, you know, that way it doesn't sit there, because when you sweat, you have like grease and salt in your sweat, and that's going to eat away at the steel and make it rust faster. So we use the alcohol to take all of that grease and sweat off. You can also use dish soap and water. Just if you use dish soap and water, just take care not to get too much water around the cross guard, like where the cross guard meets the blade and on the handle and whatnot, because the water will soak into the wood and it'll make it weak and brittle. So once we get the sword all wiped down with the alcohol section of the rag, we're going to wipe it dry with the dry end of the rag. Now granted, alcohol doesn't take too long to dry, so you don't have to be incredibly thorough about this. By the time you get to all of the blade, it'll probably already be air dried, but I just like to wipe it off again with a dry part just in case, because, yeah, reasons. Anyway, so after that's done, simply, you can either, if you have a spray bottle like this, you can spray a piece of the rag, you can spray it on the sword. I like to spray it on the sword so I make sure I'm getting like everywhere that needs to be got. I'll spray a little bit on the pommel, I'll spray some on the cross guard, and I'll spray quite a bit on the shield because sometimes I miss the shield. And then I'll just like this, I'll just tap it every few inches on along the length of the blade, and I'll begin wiping. And I'm using a dry section of the cloth. I'm not using the alcohol. I'm using a dry section of the cloth to help spread the oil around, and this will prevent any more. This will prevent any moisture from getting in and rusting your sword. Make sure, especially like on blunt blades, make sure you're also getting the edge as well as the flat, because the edges are going to rust. And I like to spend a little bit of extra attention around the rolled tip, because that will start to rust as well. So, this is a broken longsword, by the way. I'm not generally concerned about this, but for if and when your sword actually does get rusty, such as this, then there are a couple of things you can do. One, you can take like a buffer pad or buffing pad, I forget what it's called, a Scotch-Brite, I don't know, just something abrasive. Or you can do what I do and just use sandpaper. Now, most of the time when you're working on swords, if you want to go along with the finish, like if you care about the finish at all, you would stroke up and down the blade like this. If you don't care about the finish, like especially if it's just a workhorse Federschwertz or something, then circling, like circular motions is alright, it's pretty quick, but I always like to go up and down the length of the blade like this. Here I am using 180 grit, just about 200 grit sandpaper, because it's really going to knock that rust off quickly. It's not going to make the sword look terribly dull, but it's really going to knock the rust off quickly, which is what I want. So I only did one side of it. You see this part right here, you can see how almost all the rust is gone, and up here I didn't touch. It's still pretty rusty up here. So yeah, you see just how quickly sandpaper knocks off that rust. And then, you know, once you're done with that, if you want to have like a shinier, more polished finish, then you would go up to 400 grit sandpaper, 600 grit sandpaper, 800 grit, 1000, 1500, 2000, all the way up till you get to the finish that you want. But, you know, for swords like Federschwertz and sparring swords, generally I wouldn't think you would want too much of a polish on it, because if it's a sparring sword, the polish is going to be destroyed anyway. So for like sparring sword purposes, 200 grit sandpaper, even 150, 100 grit sandpaper will be enough. Like, it would be more than enough to do what you need it to do. And of course, you know, after you get through sanding it down, you would want to take the alcohol, clean it off, and then re-oil it. Like, you would especially want to re-oil it, because, you know, this is bare steel. There's moisture in the air. It is not protected by anything except for the steel itself, and it's going to end up rusting regardless of whether you touch it or not. So you want to at least recoat it with some oil. And anyway, so yeah, that's basically it. That's how you take care of your steel. That's how you keep it from rusting, and that's how you knock off any rust that does manage to get underneath the oil and start developing on your steel. It's a very simple process. Sandpaper doesn't cost more than about $5 a pack, and I buy them in sheets of 5. So, you know, it's around $4 for some 3M sandpaper. So anyway, cheers, guys.